Daniel Ashford turned 35 on a Saturday in October, in a farmhouse outside Charlottesville, Virginia, that his mother had spent 2 weeks decorating with string, lights, and mason jar candles because she said round numbers deserved a proper fuss. He hadn't wanted a party. He'd told her as much on the phone a month earlier. Standing in the kitchen of his apartment with a beer, he wasn't drinking. But Linda Ashford had never once in her life listened to Daniel when she'd already made up her mind. And so here he was, in a blue button-down his sister had ironed for him, shaking hands with cousins. He saw twice a year and neighbors who'd known him since he was a boy running barefoot through their yards. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and wood smoke. Somebody had strung up photos of him as a kid along the mantel, gap-toothed and grinning. And every time he passed them, he felt 35, less like an achievement and more like a quiet private grief. Though he couldn't have said for what, he'd built a good life. He ran a small architecture firm in town, 3 employees and a waiting list, and he'd designed the wraparound porch on this very farmhouse when he was 26 and thought he had all the time in the world. He dated when it felt worth the trouble, which wasn't often. He had a dog, a scarred old shepherd mix named Otis, who was, if he was honest, the most consistent relationship of his adult life. His friends said he was fine. His mother said he was closed, off, which was her polite way of saying he hadn't let anyone matter in a long time. Daniel didn't disagree. He just didn't examine it too closely. The way you don't press on a bruise you know is still tender. He was refilling his drink at the kitchen island, half listening to his Uncle Pete argue about the Commanders, when the back door opened and the noise of the party seemed to fall away for a second. The way a room does sometimes when something shifts in it before your eyes have caught up. He turned, and there she was. Rachel Whitfield stood in the doorway in a soft olive jacket, her dark hair longer than he remembered. Rain still beaded on her shoulders from the walk up the drive. 18 years peeled back all at once. And for a moment, Daniel wasn't a 35-year-old architect standing in his mother's kitchen. He was 17 again, sitting on the hood of his truck outside the Charlottesville football stadium, the whole sky orange with sunset, telling a girl he loved that if they were both still single at 35, they'd marry each other. No hesitation, no fear, because surely by then they'd have figured out what love was supposed to look like. They'd written it down on a spiral notebook page, torn it out, folded it into a square, and each kept a copy like a treaty between 2 countries that didn't yet know war. He hadn't seen Rachel since. She left for college in Ohio, and he stayed to help his father with the family surveying business before it folded 2 years later. They'd tried to keep in touch, postcards, then emails, then nothing, the way most young love dissolves under the weight of distance. And other people's beginnings. He'd heard secondhand through his mother's network of church friends that Rachel had married someone in Columbus, an accountant or an engineer, something respectable and forgettable. He'd assumed that was the end of the story. Most stories like theirs were, "Your mom invited me," Rachel said, before he could ask, holding up her phone like evidence, like she needed a reason to be standing in his kitchen. "She still talks to my mom. I wasn't sure if I should come, honestly. I almost didn't." "I'm glad you did," Daniel said, and meant it more than he expected to. They ended up on the porch he'd designed, away from the noise, wrapped in the kind of easy silence that used to belong only to them. Rachel told him, in pieces, that the marriage in Columbus had ended 3 years ago, quietly and without cruelty. Just 2 people who'd wanted different things, and finally admitted it. She'd moved back to Virginia last spring to help her father after his stroke, taken a job teaching art at the community college, and told herself she wasn't going to think about Daniel Ashford. A promise she'd apparently kept about, as well as most promises made to yourself at 2 in the morning. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small square of paper, soft at the folds from being opened and closed 1,000 times over 18 years, and set it on the porch railing between them. "I found it going through boxes," she said. "After the divorce, I don't even know why I kept it this long. I read it and I thought about you turning 35 this year, and I thought, if I don't come see this through, I'll always wonder." Daniel unfolded his own copy from his wallet, where it had lived, forgotten, and then rediscovered, moved from wallet to wallet for nearly 2 decades. 2 matching promises, written in a 17-year-old's clumsy handwriting, sitting side by side under the porch light. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The cicadas kept singing like nothing extraordinary was happening at all. "So," Rachel said finally, a small, nervous laugh in her voice, "here we are." What followed over the next several weeks was not the storybook rush Daniel might have imagined at 17. It was slower, more careful. 2 adults circling something enormous and trying not to knock it over. They had dinner at a place downtown on Water Street, and it felt like a first date and a 40th date at once, both of them reaching for the old shorthand of 2 teenagers who used to finish each other's sentences and finding, awkwardly, that some of it had rusted with disuse. Rachel had changed. She was steadier now, less afraid of silence, quicker to say what she meant. Daniel had changed too, guarded in ways he hadn't been at 17. Careful with his heart the way a man is careful with a wound that took a long time to close. But underneath the rust, something was still there, stubborn and real. He noticed it in small things. The way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she still laughed with her whole face. The way she still remembered that he took his coffee black even after 18 years. Because some things about a person you'd once loved simply didn't erode. And she noticed things about him too. The quiet steadiness he'd built. The porch he'd designed for a family he hadn't yet let himself have. The way he still looked at her like she was the answer to a question. He'd stopped asking out loud. It was good for a while. Genuinely good. They fell into an easy rhythm. Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. Long drives out toward the Blue Ridge with the windows down. Rachel teaching him the difference between good and mediocre watercolor. Technique while he pretended not to already know from years of architectural rendering. His mother cried actual tears the first time. Rachel came to Sunday dinner as something more than an old family friend. Otis, ever the honest judge of character, adopted Rachel within a week, sleeping at the foot of whichever couch she happened to be sitting on. But 6 weeks in, the ground beneath them started to shift, and it was Daniel's doing, though he didn't see it clearly until it was almost too late. He'd built his adult life around control, measured drawings, load-bearing calculations, everything accounted for and certain. Falling for Rachel again didn't feel like that. It felt like standing at the edge of the same cliff he'd stood at when he was 17. Except now he knew, in a way 17-year-old Daniel never could, exactly how much it hurt to fall from that height. So instead of leaning into the uncertainty the way love actually requires, he started asking for guarantees. Small ones at first. Are you sure this time? Are you sure it's really me? Are you sure you're not just running from Columbus? And then larger ones. Until one Thursday evening in his kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd first walked back into his life, he asked her flatly whether she could promise him this wouldn't end the way her marriage had. Rachel went very quiet. Daniel, she said, I can't promise you the future. Nobody can. I can promise you I'm here, and I'm trying, and that has to be enough, because it's all anyone can honestly offer. That note promised something, Daniel said, hearing how brittle his own voice sounded and unable to stop it. We promised each other something certain, and I think I need you to mean it the way we meant it then. We were 17, Rachel said gently. We didn't know anything then. We were writing a wish, not a contract. I came back because I wanted to see if what we had was real, not because I owed you a piece of paper. Her eyes were bright, but her voice didn't waver. If you need me to promise you a guarantee before you'll let yourself love me, then you're not actually here with me right now. You're still standing on that porch 18 years ago, scared of the exact same thing you were scared of then. She left that night without raising her voice, without slamming a single door, which somehow made it worse. Daniel sat alone in his kitchen until nearly 2 in the morning with the old note in his hands, rereading his own 17-year-old handwriting like it might explain something to him that his 35-year-old self had gotten backward. It took him 4 days to understand what she'd meant. 4 days of driving past the community college and not stopping, of Otis whining at the door like he too was waiting on somebody, of his mother asking careful, pointed questions over Sunday dinner that he kept deflecting. On the 5th day, sitting on the porch he'd built, it finally landed on him plainly. He hadn't been afraid Rachel would leave. He'd been afraid of loving something he couldn't control the outcome of, and he'd tried to force the wildness of real love into the same tidy blueprints he used for houses, expecting it to hold weight the same way. Love didn't work like that, and it never had. The note wasn't a guarantee. It was just 2 scared kids hoping, and hope had never once come with a warranty. He found her on a Saturday afternoon in the college's art studio, sunlight cutting through tall windows onto half-finished canvases, the smell of turpentine and wet paint hanging in the air. She looked up when he came in, wary, careful, but she didn't ask him to leave. I don't have a guarantee, Daniel said, standing in the doorway like a man finally, willing to walk off a ledge. He'd been circling his whole life. I never will. Nobody does. I was asking you for something that isn't real, because the real thing, actually loving you right now, without knowing how it ends, terrified me more than losing you ever did. And I lost you anyway being scared like that. Rachel set down her brush slowly. That's the most honest thing you've said to me since I walked back into your kitchen, she said. I don't want the note, Daniel said. Not as a promise. I want you. However uncertain that is. I'd rather stand on that cliff, with you not knowing what happens than stand on solid ground without you, being certain of nothing but that I'm alone. She crossed the studio and put her hand against his chest, right over his heart. the way she used to when they were teenagers, and thought they understood love completely. "Then stop asking me to prove something with a piece of paper," she said, "and just choose me every day. That's the only guarantee that ever actually means anything." They were married the following June, on the same farmhouse porch where the old note had first reappeared between them. String lights overhead again, his mother crying happy tears this time instead of merely hopeful ones. Otis wearing an absurd bow tie Rachel had insisted on. Daniel kept the original note framed in his office, not as a contract fulfilled, but as a reminder of the two people they used to be and the two people they'd finally, imperfectly become. Rachel painted a small watercolor of the porch at sunset, the exact color of the sky the night two 17-year-olds made a promise they didn't understand yet, and hung it beside the frame. Some promises, Daniel came to understand, weren't meant to bind two people to a fixed outcome. They were meant to be a hand reaching across 18 years of silence, saying, "I still think you're worth the risk." And on the porch he'd designed with his own two hands, in the town he'd never left, Daniel finally let himself believe that the best things in life were never guaranteed. They were simply chosen over and over by two people brave enough to keep choosing anyway.